Let us discuss this second part on discussion on design metrics of embedded systems. As in the last part, the outcome of this particular session also happens to be same as we did it for the last time. Okay, so last session and this session outcome is the same one. Like to investigate the techno-commercial aspects, which are the design metrics for embedded systems. In the last session, what we have already or in this particular session, what we are going to discuss is all about what are the design challenges which are there in front of the embedded system designer. There is a new term that's called as a design productivity gap, and how the current version of this particular design productivity gap exists. With some example, we are going to say it, and maybe what is the immediate solution in order to bridge this particular gap, what we call design productivity gap. Okay, and this discussion we are going to do on top of what your discussion that we made last time on what is the design metrics. We understood the significance of design metrics, the knowing design metrics from the perspective of embedded system designer, and how is going to be weighted if at all design metrics are being known well in advance before the design process. And then we understood couple of design metrics with the help of few examples last time. Okay, so let's start understanding or just recap last time what we have seen as a time to market. So time to market, as we all know, is going to be a very, or rather it's a very demanding design metrics. So this particular design metrics, as we know, it is a time that is required to develop a product to a point that it can be sold to the customer. Right. Now, when we see this particular definition, or when we see this particular explanation of the design metrics, time to market, we get to know that it is very essential for the company to get that particular product very early into the market. Now, what is that very early is all about? So let's try and understand with some graphs or with some kind of trend that is being there. So as we discuss, like the revenue generated by a company for a product, for a specific product in the market, is basically some time zone, basically a time window. Okay, so this revenue generated by the product in the market is basically follows some normal distribution. Like it starts slowly, then it reaches to the peak of its revenue, and then as the demand of that particular product in the market start diminishing, you can expect that the fall of a revenue that can be generated out of that product in the market can be again in a decreasing trend of it. But there is some time window over which you can expect that the revenue can be very stable or revenue can be maximized. And this particular window that we call as a market window, where this is a period during which the product would have the highest sell. And if you see that this particular range, as you can see, out of, if we consider the total time as in 0 to X, then this particular time is the time in which the product can fetch maximum revenue for the company. Now, if that is the case, then it is very essential, or we can understand for that this particular time to market, averagely, it is being referred to be as an 8-month in the early days. But with the kind of volatility, with the kind of uncertainty in the market regarding a product, or with the option and choices those are being available for a specific product in the market, nowadays this time to market will not have this expanded window of 8 months, but it would definitely in a shrink version of around 2 to 4 months, isn't it? Now, if we understand these particular facts, then it's very interesting to understand if at all any particular product, if the entry of that particular product in the market is getting delayed, and if it is not being correctly fitting into this particular market window, then obviously the revenue that would be generated out of this particular particular product in the market, that definitely going to be an hampered one, that's definitely going to be as a setback for the company. So let's understand this particular facet, like what is the significance and what is the importance of any product to be in the market right at the correct time, that is on time. And let's understand it with some couple of examples. So in this particular discussion, what we are going to understand is a product entry into the market, if it is delayed, then that's definitely going to be a costly affair for the company's revenue model. And let's understand it with some couple of examples. So in order to understand the impact of delayed entry of a product in the market, let's understand this simple triangle revenue model. So in this particular triangle revenue model, you can understand this y-axis is a revenue that is generated by the product, and x-axis is the timeline of that particular product in the market. So if you see this particular outer triangle, then this outer triangle indicates that the product has got an entry on time into the market. So it reached to this particular peak. Now, if you understand that the total life of a product in the market happens to be 2W, for example, from this point to this point, if it is 2W, then the revenue that the peak revenue that this particular product would fetch from the market can be referred to be as half of this particular window, half of this particular period, and that can be referred to be as NW. Okay, and after reaching to the maxima, as we have seen in the last slide also, that it goes on a deteriorating way. So here the model or the revenue model is being made with a triangle revenue model. Okay, if this is outer triangle represents it's an on time, and the inner triangle that it represents that this is a delayed entry. Okay, so even though a particular product, instead of getting it entry at this particular point at the origin, if it is getting delayed by some week or it is being delayed by the amount called D, even though it is being delayed one, the peak revenue for such kind of product or specific kind of product in the market will, this particular W will not be shifted right. This would be the same one, because for a specific product to get a maximum revenue in the market, there is a specific timeline. And in order to catch up that specific timeline, it is very important to get that particular product launched in the market at the correct time of it. So if even though the product is getting entry into the market at some late time, also delayed entry of it, still the revenue generation point in time, that would remains the same. So after getting this maximum peak revenue from the delayed entry at this point, again, there going to be a deterioration, and the lifespan of this particular product is going to end at the 2W itself. It is not going to extend anymore to that. Okay. Now, if we understand this particular triangle revenue model, then we can simply understand that the revenue that is being generated out of a product, we can assume that revenue, we can understand that revenue to be as an area of the triangle. Okay. And if we see the loss that is being incurred because of the delayed entry of the product, that can be understood as the difference between the on-time entry and the delayed entry triangle areas. So triangle area for the on-time minus triangle area of this delayed entry triangle. This is what the difference is going to refer to be as a loss because of the delayed entry of a product in the market. So let's understand it with some couple of examples so that we can have the reinforcement of the statement that we are making at the moment. Okay. So we all understand the area of a triangle happens to be like 1/2 base into height. So when I have got the on time, this outer triangle I'm talking about, when I have got the on time entry of the product, I can have this 1/2 into 2W, which is the total lifespan of a product in the market, into the height that is being referred to be as an W. Okay. Then with a simple trigonometric rules, we can understand that this W and this height happens to be same because of this right angle. Okay. So this basics of the geometric is being known to all of us. So we can easily make this particular choice at the very moment. Okay. Then delayed entry, we can understand that 1/2 into W minus D plus W. So this particular area in terms of this to this, it is being defined as W minus D, like W minus D plus this particular W happens to be into the height that again happens to be like W minus D. So these are the equations that we can understand for the area of the triangle for on-time entry as well as triangle for this delayed entry of this particular product. Then percentage revenue loss, if you have this on-time area of on-time entry minus area of the delayed entry, then you get to know that this particular equation D into 3W minus D upon 2W square in terms of percentage like 100%. Then if we try and understand this with a couple of real examples, couple of the numeric examples, then let's understand that for a specific product, the lifetime of that particular product in the market, if it is 52 weeks, and let's understand that particular product gets delayed in the market by 4 weeks. Okay, out of total span of 52 weeks as a lifetime span, if that product gets delayed in the market by 4 weeks, then you can understand with this particular example, the revenue loss that this particular company might face because of delayed entry of this product by 4 weeks is around 22%. And if this particular delayed happens to be slightly greater than this 4 week, and if it is going to be of a 10 weeks, then there is a severe setback, like 50% loss in the revenue generated by that product would be observed if this particular product is delayed into the market by 10 weeks. This is something which is very serious, and this is something which is really need to understand. Now you can understand, out of 52 weeks, if the product gets delayed in the market by 10 weeks, then this is not even a 10% delay, but the revenue that you would expect, the setback in the revenue that you can expect is around 50%. And this indicates that, yes, if at all a particular product gets delayed into the market lately, then delayed entries are always going to be costly. Delayed entries are always going to set back the revenue generated for the company by a huge amount. And that is what time to market happens to be very significant design metrics, that getting that particular product into the market at right time in order to generate the maximum revenue out of that particular product is very essential. And that is what any product has to be there in the market at the correct time of it, right? So with this example, we have justified like how this particular delays to reach into the market is costly. So this is becoming very prominent design metrics at the moment. Okay, so let's understand further the relations between the NRE cost and unit cost. As we also understood in the last part of the discussion, that unit cost that happens to be a monetary cost of manufacturing each copy of the system, excluding this particular NRE cost, right? And NRE cost we understood in a way that it's a one-time monetary cost of designing the system, isn't it? Means till the prototype. So whatever the amount that company spends in order to develop the first working prototype of it, whatever the expenses or whatever the amount that is being incurred in order to make use of the technology, manpower, and whatnot, all these particular costs do covers into the cost of NRE cost, right? And after that, manufacturing of that particular unit really starts up. So if at all, if we need to understand what is the total cost that is incurred by a company for that specific product, then I can understand the total cost happens to be this NRE cost plus whatever the cost that is required to generate the single copy of it, and accordingly how many copies that particular product has generated in the production. I mean, the total cost happens to be NRE cost plus unit cost into number of units that has been manufactured for that particular product. So in that, according to this particular equation, the per product cost for the company happens to be total cost divided by how many number of units, that is number of units those are being produced out of it. And if I just make a substitution, simple substitution for this, I can understand the per product cost happens to be the NRE cost divided by number of units that is being produced plus unit cost. Now this particular equation talks or gives me very significant meaning out of it. So how that particular meaning is or this equation is significant, let's try and understand with some examples. Okay, so let's say that for a specific product, the NRE cost happens to be $2,000. NRE cost happens to be $2,000, and unit cost happens to be around, for example, $100. Now, if you see the 10 units of this particular proposition is being manufactured, then total cost that happens to be like $2,000 according to this equation, $2,000 plus unit cost, that is $10 into this 10 units are being produced and $100. So total cost, when NRE cost happens to be 2,000, unit cost happens to be 100, and for such 10 units are being produced, the total cost happens to be this $3,000. And per product cost, if you understand per product cost out of this equation, then it happens to be $300. Means you can understand that there is a difference between $200 of this particular unit cost that is to the company and per product cost to that company when you incorporate this NRE cost into picture. And this discussion can be very easily understood with the help of the three entities: NRE cost, unit cost, and how many number of units are being produced out of it. So there is a relation between these three units. And I can very easily say that if at all 10 units are being produced, then this 2000 NRE cost and 100 unit cost, it per product cost that happens to be this $200 excess to that of this one unit cost. Okay. And that is what it is being written, or that is what it is being understood, that this total NRE cost is getting amortized over the number of units that is being produced. And in this particular case, this NRE cost of $2,000 is amortized over the unit cost, and that produces an additional $200 per unit that becomes to be then per product cost. Okay, and so this is some statistics which is being given for this for the understanding of this particular NRE cost and unit cost. How this NRE cost and unit cost is being related to each other. Okay, so let's try and understand the it further, that if I have some NRE cost estimations according to the different technologies that I might use. Okay, let's say that technology A meets up with for example, this 2000 or this $2,000 as an NRE cost, and unit cost happens to be 100, for example. The second technology, the NRE cost is around $30,000 and unit cost happens to be, like for example, $30. And with the technology C, the unit cost happens to be $100,000 and the NRE cost happens to be $100,000 and unit cost happens to be $2. Now, if you see this particular trend, we can understand this particular trend with the help of these two graphs, where the left graph that indicates that total cost that is being incurred and against the number of units those are being produced. So you can understand the total cost that would keep on rising, okay, and rising in a proportion as you can see here for this particular graph. So number of units those are being produced which are high in numbers, and accordingly this particular graph would be having a trend of this per product cost or the total cost that would be amortized again for the per product cost. This is because the NRE cost is less. In technology B, you can see that there is some rising trend, but not as with a slope or as with a steep with this particular technology A, because already the NRE cost is being very high, and that is what the unit cost that has been dropped down. And when technology C has got still elevated unit cost, then in that case you can expect that the total cost that can be remain constant, and even the product that could be sold in a unit cost of around $2. Means this particular example simply exemplifies that more the investment that the company would do into this NRE cost, obviously the number of units that this company needs to get manufactured to get into the market, that has to be very high, so that the company can sell out their product with a minimal cost, competitive cost in the market, and get the maximum revenue to be generated out of it. I mean, this is what the proposition that happens to be for this non-recurring engineering cost as well as this unit cost, and this particular NRE and unit cost happens to be bound with this kind of relations at the moment. Okay, so let's, even this right diagram also indicates the same, where fall of this per product cost, fall of the per product cost, you can see that for technology A, there will not be significant fall of the per product cost. There will not be significant decrease in the per product cost, but the per product cost significance difference is being observed with the technology C, because heavy investment in the non-recurring engineering cost is being made, and accordingly you can see that number of units which are being produced are bulk in volume, and that is what the per product cost is a steep decrease into it. I mean, these are some business propositions. These are some financial, calculation that always goes on when any company gets a product, and this the involvement of that product happens to be very heavily into the market. Okay, so these are few statistics by which we can understand the NRE cost and unit cost always being there into the inverse proportion, provided the number of units those are being sold, manufactured by the company are very heavy. So these are the three factors which are related in this particular way. Okay, so let's understand that here at this particular moment, we cannot ignore that time to market, isn't it? So because we understand correct right time entry into the market is only going to make this particular thing happens. So even though with a very high investment with the NRE cost, if that particular product doesn't got launched into the market at the correct time, so irrespective of the technology used, irrespective of the features that particular product would have, being a specific market window, I don't think that if time to market is not being achieved, then usage of any kind of sophisticated technology would even fetch the revenue for that particular company. That is what time to market becomes very significant and relevant design metrics in the today's trend also. Okay, so let's try and understand the next design metrics, which are the performance design metrics, which are something like, as we already know it, we are just going to have the a little discussion on it. Okay, so it is being written like widely used measures of the systems are the widely abused one. Okay, so how exactly we are supposed to understand it? So let's have my interpretation to come into the picture at the moment. Okay, so let's say, for example, if we have some product, then if we market, or if we just get that particular product launched into the market with a features of clock frequency and instructions per second, obviously those contributes, no doubt onto it. But if we feature that particular product with the help of these features like clock frequency and instructions per cycle, so that might not be a good measures by which the customer would be attracted to the product. That is for sure, because customer is not expected to be a technical one all the time. For a common customer, it really does not matter that what is the clock frequency used into the system, or what are the instructions per second that is being running behind this particular system. That will not be that much importance. So according to customer, what is importance is, like, for example, in case of the digital camera, the user would care about how fast it processes the image, not the clock speed or the instructions per second, isn't it? So here I will take this opportunity to explain something which is beyond this lines which is being written there. Okay, so even though the clock frequencies are not so high, even though the instructions per second also not to be very competent by the underlying architecture, but if the usage of that particular architecture is made sensibly, or is made in some kind of the concurrent way, the parallel processing way, then definitely with even a less clock frequency and with even less instructions per second, you can achieve the maximum performance out of it. Okay, so it is not always essential that very high clock and high MIPS kind of specification of the underlying processes would always give you the high performance. It completely depends on what is the capability of designer to make use of that underlying architecture to best of its use. And that is what it is being written, that even though they are the most widely used measure of the systems, which are clock frequency and instructions per second, but this can be widely abused also. It doesn't mean that a product has got very high clock, the architecture which made you in the product has got very high frequency and high MIPS. That means the performance is going to be good all the time. No, as I said you, it is completely based on to what wiseness is being used in order to make use of that architecture for this particular product. Okay, that is what the statement that is being given here is. Widely used measure of the systems are the widely abused one. So try and understand this in its own sense of it. Okay, so latency, as we all understood, it's a response time. We have discussed it even before also, right? So it's a time between task, start of the task and end of the task. Let's try and understand again within camera example, where camera A and B processes image in 0.25 seconds. So 0.2 seconds is the latency that is being referred where you are clicking an image and image is being stored into the camera. Okay, so start of a task and end of a task, for example. Now, next metrics that we are about to discuss is the throughput. That is how many number of tasks per second. That is camera A with the help of latency which is being given as 0.25 seconds. It is imperative that the camera A has got 4 images per second. It can process 4 images per second, isn't it? So it quite illustrative that these 4 images that comes out because of the latency of 0.25. But if the camera has got a latency of 0.25, is it mean all the time it has to give you the 4 images per second only? No, this particular relation does not hold true in many cases. Okay, and those cases are where the you can understand the throughput can be more than the latency seems to imply due to concurrency of the operations. Now, what kind of concurrent operations that we can expect into this camera? Like for example, camera B may process 8 images per second. And how can it do it? It can do it by capturing a new images while previous image is being stored. Means there will not be a complete cascading operations in the camera. Cascading operations in a sense, let the first image be captured and stored, then the second image would be ready for the capture. No, when the second image is being there into the storage phase, the second image can be taken up. Okay, when first image is being there at the storage place, the second image can be taken up. This is what we say it's some concurrency. And we have, if we have the independent hardware to do this task, then that concurrency becomes very easy. Okay, and that is what in the digital camera example last time we understood that there are many aspects which can be incorporated with an hardware or software approach. So if we have an independent hardware provided for these independent operations, then definitely the throughput can be more than the latency that is getting produced. And that is what we have the next metric that comes out to be as an speed of camera B over A happens to be B's performance upon A's performance, and we can see that the throughput speed up that happens to be 2 in case of camera B as against compared with the camera A. Okay, so this particular discussion, if I want to summarize these discussions very quickly, I can say that the metrics which are used generally, they does not signifies or they does not portray the real picture of the performance. The performance, in order to get the maximum performance, there are many approaches, there are many techniques to be used in order to accelerate the performance, even with the existing hardware setups also. Even with the existing features of the processors, you can excel the performance of the system just by having some clever design exercises to made upon it. Okay, so this is what like this particular slide wanted to communicate to us, like this performance design metrics are important and that is to be understood in this particular way. Okay, so let's understand one very interesting aspect that I wanted to discuss at this moment, which is design productivity gap. Now, design productivity gap specifically refers to an ability of a designer to make use of an underlying architecture or to make use of an underlying available silicon state. I repeat, the design productivity gap refers to an ability of a designer in order to explore, in order to use the underlying either the architectural features or the underlying silicon state on the chip. Now let's understand this with this particular graph. Okay, so what you can see in the timeline of x-axis, you have got the years mentioned from 81 to 2009, for example. And on the x-axis, on the y-axis, what you have is by virtue of the Moore's law. We all understand Moore's law, right? By virtue of the Moore's law, how many logical transistors per chip is being integrated, that is being given out, right? Okay, and so you can understand as the time progression happens, the IC capacity has been increased. It is increased even in this particular way, for example. But whatever the increase that is being found in the IC capacity, have the designer able to produce that particular capacity in terms of performance? And that the answer unfortunately happens to be no. the IC capacity or the semiconductor state available on the chip has gone very rapidly as against of its effective usage as the time progresses. And that is what this particular line indicates. It's an IC capacity growth. And this line indicates the way in which this IC capacity is being produced in the actual applications. The way in which the exploration of this IC capacity is made for this particular applications. And that is what you can see, that this particular gap has always widening even with a time progression also. Getting this? And this particular gap, what we are getting at any point of time, is referred to be as design productivity gap. Means in a design exercises, can you effectively able to produce the capacity given by a hardware? And if that is found to be as a gap, it is called design productivity gap. And this design productivity gap still holds today in the most significant manner. We have discussed it till only up to 2009. We are now there in 2020. So this is what the picture of 11 years. Now in 11 years, you can understand from the last 11 years, the semiconductor capacity has gone tremendously, isn't it? It has outbitten even the Moore's law also. We are there into the nanoscale design technology, the nanoscale semiconductor technology. So IC, the number of components available on the IC, semiconductor state available per unit area, that has gone very rapidly. And as against of that, the usage of this semiconductor state in the today's application context is also not being seen to be very significant. That is what there is always concern, and there is an always burden on the designer. There is the designer's capability is questioned when he or she will not be able to make use of effective semiconductor state on the chip for his or her applications. And that is what there happens to be a gap called as a design productivity gap. Now, in order to bridge up this particular gap, can we have, or can we get to know few of the solutions those are being provided in order to minimize this particular gap? If I want to share my perspective onto it, my perspective goes into the availability of the multi-core architectures that today we are having with us. By what virtue the multi-core architectures are possible? The silicon state on the chip has gone to such an extent that what is to be done for that particular silicon state? So whatever core that you have, can't I replicate that particular core on the available silicon area? Because always the designer would be there in a question that if at all some silicon state is remain unutilized or underutilized. So that is one of the fact by which the multi-core architectures have really been shooting up in the today's day. We have quad core, octa core, hexa core. So all this particular number of cores on a specific chip happens to be in order to address, or in order to provide some kind of solutions, in order to minimize this gap, so that if we can use this multi-core architectures very effectively, we would give an justice to an application which requires very fast processing, which requires a parallel processing. And by exploring this multi-core architecture, we can definitely give justice to this particular gap which is being, or we can address this particular gap with the help of this multi-core architectures. Okay, so this is my perspective of just making you aware that how does the technology really progresses, what is the the driving forces behind even the technology to progress. So this is one of the driving force happens to get for this availability of the multi-core architectures. And needless to say you that the Intel today claims that you have a supercomputer at your desktop. It just because of the multi-core architectures, those happens to be there in your underlying hardware, isn't it? So this is my perspective, which I shared with you in order to bridge this particular gap, what company having, or what many people are being trying to make advantage of it. Okay, now let's discuss quickly with the design challenges of embedded systems. Okay, now we understand the design challenge happens to be, the obvious design goal happens to be construct an implementation with the desired functionality. Obviously, the functionality cannot be compromised. whatever design functionality is expected, that is needs to be constructed. So this particular word has got a special meaning of it. When I say it's some construction of an implementation with desired functionality, that means I need to give very insightful design thoughts in order to implement the desired functionality. Okay, so that happens to be one of the obvious design goal. The next challenge that happens to be, as we have seen from last two part of this particular discussion, is we need to make the design in order to optimize the numerous design metrics simultaneously. Like, for example, we understood there happens to be a competition between the speed and power. There happens to be a competition between size and performance. There happens to be a competition between the power and NRE cost. So you have to make an efforts in the design in order to optimize these conflicting or competing design metrics simultaneously. And this really has become a very key design challenge as far as the embedded systems are concerned. Okay. And one more challenge that is being there always ahead, as per our latest discussion, is how the bridging of this design productivity gap would be possible. How to make use of the silicon state available on the chip more effectively, so that designers' appreciation or designers' appraisal would be based on these particular factors. Okay, so these are few of the design challenges based on the discussion that we had in the last two part of this particular uh, design metrics. Okay, so let's come to the conclusion side of this particular discussion of design metrics. So what we understood is design metrics always plays an important role as per as the process of designing the system. Then knowledge of this commercial aspect will definitely help the designer to keep abreast with the time, and he will be appraised if he or she really has got well knack of having optimization of the numerous design metrics simultaneously. You would be able to address the key challenge of this embedded system design. Then it definitely motivates the designer to use the resources in more aggressive or in the optimized way. In the greed of satisfying for the design conflicting design metrics, this is also expected. Even to address the design productivity gap, this is also expected, right? And finally, I would say that all the discussion that we had helps in understanding the role of an engineer towards to be an asset or indispensable for the industry. Each one of us wanted this particular aspiration. We all are aspired to be highly appreciated as well as to be an asset or indispensable in one or the other manner for any company. That is what would be the question of our repute also. And that is what the discussion, if you understand and try and practice onto it, definitely it helps in understand, helps in being this in the role. Okay, fine. So as I told you last time, the assignment that you're supposed to do onto this is whatever the product that you like, according to your liking of the product, I want you to evaluate the discussed design metrics onto it. Okay. And this is going to be an assignment which you will be doing for this particular unit. Okay. And the reference book, as I said you, the reference book that we have used is Embedded System Design, a Unified Hardware Software Introduction by Frank Wahid and Tony Divagis. Next time we are going to discuss about what are the different guidelines which are being given for the selection of hardware or architecture and memory component for design of embedded systems. Okay. So with this, I conclude the second part of the discussion on design metrics. So thank you for joining.